Good morning everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I think it's pretty obvious that I'm a new YouTuber and my skills are hopefully improving. Today's video I'm going to show how I built a custom sized farmhouse table for my daughter. But also I wanted to mention that my video views are definitely growing, but there's only like 0.5% of the people who are subscribing. So if you like anything in this video today, I really hope that you'll do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe. Thanks very much and enjoy the video. I actually built this table back in 2018, and that was long before I even thought about doing YouTube videos. So all I have are some still images. I built it using spruce materials that you can get at Home Depot or Lowe's, and I primarily used 2x6s. Unlike most of the projects that I do where I pre-designed the things in SolidWorks, on this one I just knew the size of the tabletop that I wanted and the approximate size of the bench that I wanted. I based those dimensions on the size of the room where this table would go, and it turned out that the tabletop would be 39 inches wide and 60 inches long. My original plan was that I would stain this thing, but changed my mind as I progressed, and I'll explain that here in a bit. The first thing that I did was cut all the material to the lengths that they would need to be. Now this kind of material comes with rounded edges, and being that I would be joining the tabletop 2x6s edge to edge, I wanted that rounded edge removed. So I ran them down the table saw, removing those rounded edges. I also wanted the bench to be super heavy duty, so I used 2x6s for that as well. I ripped them in half and I would join these side to side. To make sure that the tabletop pieces would stay aligned, I used the table saw and cut a 1/4 inch wide groove down the center of each edge. I then cut some 1/4 inch plywood into some long strips, and I would insert that into these grooves, and that would make sure everything stayed aligned. I wanted the tabletop to appear to be 2.5 inches thick, so I created these bands that would go around the edges, and I cut grooves in those bands. You can see one of those bands in this picture. The groove in these bands would align with the groove that's also in the edge of the wider pieces. Once I had all the grooves cut and the strips of plywood cut, it was time to glue up all those pieces. This picture shows kind of what I did to glue those up and how I fixtured it. Here it is with the clamps removed, and just prior to me putting the ends on it, you can see that it would have been very beautiful stained, but it was about this time that I decided that the wood was too soft for a tabletop and that I was going to cover it with metal. Here's a picture of the bench top after I had it glued together and prior to my sanding it, and then here's an image of the piece after I've sanded it. I basically just used a big belt sander to do that. It turned out pretty well. Even though the table is fairly small compared to what most people think of as a farmhouse table, I wanted the legs to appear to be bulky. So I made these legs using 3 2x6s, and I think I wound up with a finished size of 4.5 inches by 4.5 inches square. I wanted all the legs to have some fluting on each side, so I set up a table router with a 3/4 inch ball nose bit in it, and then experimented with some scrap wood before I would cut each groove. I think I cut the center groove on all 4 sides first, and then each groove on side of that after that. Here's an image of 3 of the finished legs with the flutes in them. At this point they still require sanding. Here's my lovely assistant sanding some of the parts. And at this point, like I said earlier, I had decided to cover the top with metal. So I was able to attach the legs from the top into the legs. You can see some of the holes there. I also put in some boards between the legs. They were 1.5 inches thick and I think 4.5 inches wide. You'll be able to see those in some images in a minute when I turn the table upside down. So for the metal covering, I decided to use a material called galvanneal. It won't rust. You can sand it and clean it up with some steel wool or whatever. The first thing I did was lay this piece of metal on top of the table, just in case the table wasn't square, and I marked where the corners of the table were. I then put contact adhesive on both the metal and the wooden top and carefully laid the piece of metal back onto the top of the table. I cut the corners, as you can see here. I wanted a little tab that would overlap around each corner, and then in the end I was going to solder those corners up. To bend those edges down, I used a 50-pound weight. It's the gold block looking thing in the picture there. I used a 50-pound weight on the tabletop, a 2-pound sledgehammer with some blocks of wood, and I would beat those edges down, giving a really nice sharp clean corner along the top edge. Here it is upside down, and you can see the pieces of wood that I spoke about earlier that I put between the legs. I think they're 4.5 inches tall, 1.5 inches wide, thick, and I screwed them straight down to the tabletop. The legs were very rigid at this point, and I was extremely happy with the way they were turning out. I didn't want any of the sharp edges of the metal left exposed anywhere around the bottom, so the metal was wide enough that would allow me to completely wrap the 2.5 inch wide edge I spoke about earlier. You can't really see it in this picture, but that edge actually rolls over into a groove back up towards the top of the table. You couldn't get cut on it if you wanted to. After I had all 4 edges rolled over and tucked in to the groove that I spoke about, I secured all that with a bunch of Phillips head screws into the edge of the 2.5 inch wide edge board. You can see that the corners were coming together pretty nicely, and it was time to solder them. That turned out to be a little bit more of a challenge than I thought, mainly because I don't think I had the right flux or right solder. In this image, everything is painted and complete. You can see the soldered corners look pretty nice. As far as painting, I spray painted everything with spray cans, and I spray painted everything black to begin with, and then I came back and covered it with white, kind of to give it that old antique-y look. Here's a picture of me after I had written my little special note to my daughter and her family about the table. Here's a couple of images of the completed table in their dining area. They later added some more chairs around it, and it turned out really nice. Again, if you see anything in this video that you liked and you thought was entertaining or that helped you in some way, please hit that like button and subscribe. I really would appreciate it.